Hey everyone, my name is Tamari Lana with Fab Collab Live, and today is episode, we really should count them, but I'm gonna guess it's around 57 of Curtain Call, which is our live interview series. Hey Alina. And we focus on featuring women and non-binary artists and arts workers every week on Fab Collab's Instagram. So I'm super excited, as I always am, to host this week's artist and arts worker. And her name is Alicia Rose. And believe it or not, we spoke with her exactly 1 year ago today, and I can't even believe it's been a year, and I can't believe it worked out perfectly. So I'm just gonna invite her, and thanks everyone for joining. Hey Erin, hey guys. Hi.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can totally hear you. Can you hear me?
We got this. Yes.
Oh my god, my whole internet crashed and I restarted everything, but here we are. Sorry for being so late.
All good. I'm just delighted to chat with you again.
Me too. Can you believe it's been a year? I can't believe it.
What?
I can't believe that happened. And I don't know how it happened. But also, I looked at the flyer from last year and it was exactly a year. It was February 3rd.
Look at that.
It?
No.
I think we're going to have to speak every February 3rd.
I'll put it in my calendar from now.
Oh my God. Because honestly, I've thought about our conversation last year. Like, I feel like it was a few months ago, but I've thought about it so much, like nonstop. Really, I have. Like, you said so many things. Like, we'll get into them for our viewers, but you just said so many things that really made me think about like our society and the way that we live in like all ways. So
I enjoy like just chatting with you, and I love the work that you're doing and amplifying artists' voices. So anything I can do to support that, I'm in.
Thanks. That means so much. Oh my goodness. Thank you. So tell us, how, yeah, I know exactly 1 year exactly today.
Crazy.
It's insane. I couldn't have planned that. There's no way you would have been, people aren't free. Like, I can't believe it. Hi, Alina. Yeah, so we want to continue a bit. I know things have changed a bit for you, but we'll get into it. So can you tell us, well, first of all, how are you, by the way? How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I think the spectrum of that question of like, how are people doing has changed drastically in the past 2 years. Like,
oh my God.
Prior to that, how are you doing? Is like, yeah, whatever, I'm fine. Now I'm like, I'm grateful and feeling blessed and, delighted to be moving into another Black History Month and also Lunar New Year. So
right?
there's a lot going on. How have you been?
Oh my God, amazing. Actually, overall, I have to say I'm the same as you. The more time progresses, the more grateful I am for just how good I am. Like I can't take it for granted. And like I live in a beautiful place. I got engaged
Congratulations.
in September. Thank you. And he's on the Fab Collab team. Say hi, Ali. Obviously. And what else? I've been on tour. Like I went to the States. I've had about 10,000 COVID tests. So I feel really lucky, just really lucky. And yeah, I'm good and lucky. And Fab Collab, since last year we talked, has put on like 4 massive productions called Women in Song in different venues, like including Kerner Hall and the Aga Khan and Scarborough and like all these, and Lula. We've had like 50 episodes of Curtain Call or something like that. We started another series called Girls with Gear online. Like I just feel so lucky to be working with so many amazing artists and people. I know this interview is about you, so I'm going to stop talking. But I really I just wanted to say, like, I feel so lucky.
About art, so that's beautiful.
True.
Love it.
True, true. And I just also want to say that, like, it's just been making me realize how limitless, like, the number of great, amazing artists that need to be featured are. Like, we go on for like years and years and years and forever. There's like an infinite. I just keep discovering new people, and that's been really like the biggest blessing of the year. I'm like, holy shit, there's so many amazing artists. Where have you been hiding?
It's beautiful. I mean, when we think of the pandemic, and I think we talked a little bit about last year, when you think about philanthropy and like where do you fund and where do you prioritize funding, and like that's really hard decisions. I'm not on the philanthropy team at TD anymore, but work really closely with them. And you know, you're thinking about of course there's healthcare and all of these different things to consider, but you also think about the arts being like the fabric that knits us together. And I have also had the joy of having opportunities to discover new artists and different art forms, and just the massive creativity to think about how to keep us feeling connected in such a virtual context. Like
Mhm.
I am equally grateful to artists as I am to healthcare workers during this time, because it's really, you know, helped us through and continue to help us through kind of continuing to feel a sense of self and community.
Mhm,
So
mhm, mhm.
I'm right there with you.
I know, I know. I definitely know that you are. And then you nailed it just there saying, well, you nailed it for what we want to talk about today in part, in terms of supporting art frontline workers and artists. And I think I would love to just like delve right into it, because last year, for those of you who didn't watch the interview last year, you should go watch it, because I don't know, it was my favorite one, I think. No offense to everyone else. I love everybody. But this was the most fascinating like
Say that to
insight.
all.
No, I'm serious. I don't say that to her. It's just because it was the most like fascinating insight into how things work that we don't normally get. You know, like we said last year, TD is a big, you know, institution that could feel like it has like a strong fourth wall that you like can't penetrate, and you don't really know, right? You just see the logo everywhere. You see this big institution. But speaking with you really like gave me and us and everyone insight into like understanding there's real people behind these places doing really beautiful things within the context of the you know bigger institution, and you're one of those people. So like we're so grateful to talk to you again, and
Thank
that
you.
you're there. Thanks for being there. But okay, so for those of you not watching, who didn't watch last year, Alicia was leading, I guess. There's so many like words in your title,
I
but in some
can't remember what my title was last year, if I'm going to be honest, but I have moved into another role, but still working within like the community framework.
Yeah, so why don't you tell us sort of where you were last year and where you are today,
Yeah.
in that sense, and then we'll get into other things as well.
Yeah, so last year I was much closer to working on our philanthropy team. I cannot actually remember if I was officially still on it, but I
I
was working,
think you were. I think it was the
yeah,
last month, because I think in March. I think
it's
in
shit.
March, according to your some bio or other, in March last year, you
You might,
switched roles. But you're at the head of TD Ready Commitment, if I remember correctly, right? But you tell
oh,
us.
no, not at the head, not at the head, but
In my mind, you're at the head. In my mind, you're at the head.
rolling out some of that work. And last year, I was very close to our Black History Month campaign and strategy, and so worked really closely with a team of people to think about what it meant to show up in community during Black History Month, but also during COVID, and that. You know, entailed from a philanthropic perspective, but then also from a colleague engagement perspective, which is the role that I've moved into since the last time we've talked. And you know, it's an interesting role to be in. Much like you just said, when you think of these large financial institutions or any large institution, you just see the logo. It's a product that you go in and you use, and you might have your mortgage with, or whatever that might look like. But all of these places are filled with passionate people who care about their community and who have interest in what's happening all around them and across their country. And so sometimes it's about like, how do we harness some of that passion and kind of, you know, help think about how our colleagues at TD or anywhere else can engage in their local communities.
Mm-hmm.
And we see a lot of them who are incredibly passionate about arts and culture, incredibly passionate about, you know, amplifying voices of artists that you don't always hear. And so it fits really well into our strategy, which is about amplification of equity deserving artists. And so, you know, part of my role now is how do I facilitate that connection? We have a new kind of landscape in how we engage with the arts. You're no longer, at least for right now, I can't wait to sit in a theater again. I cannot wait to see a curtain go up. Like, I'm just so excited to sit in a theater and watch a curtain go up. But, you know, as we look at this, we look at how we can engage our colleagues into supporting artists, into supporting these kinds of organizations, and also to share, you know, the joy that they have found in discovering a new artist or discovering a new art form. And so that's some of the work that I'm doing. Really specifically, it's around colleague engagement around all of our different approaches. We're not just about arts and culture. We're about, you know, a variety of different drivers around better health and a vibrant planet, et cetera. But, you know my personal story. I have a passion around the arts. And so I'm really always interested to see how we can better kind of use the power of our people to amplify the arts sector in our country.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I've been dying to ask you on that note. I mean, all year thinking about it. Last year you said that you and your team had to make some insanely difficult decisions, whether to fund, you know, arts organizations that really relied on TD funding, or to fund PPE suits in the health industry. And I remember we had a conversation about, like, first of all, like, why is that landing on your shoulders? You know, how does that land on your shoulders and on the banks, you know?
Yeah.
And I really would be thinking all year, like, is that still the case? Are you guys still making those decisions? Are you still involved in those decisions? Can you give us, like, a sort of update on what's happening? I've been dying to know all year.
Yeah, I think when the pandemic hit, nobody knew which way was up, right? Like, nobody had been through this before. Organizations were reaching out, wanting to ensure that we were still going to support them. Of course, there were new needs that were coming up in our local communities. Our philanthropy team was kind of working around the clock, and how do we address this? But we're also familiarizing ourselves with the landscape in real time, right? So everyone's just going through this in real time. Yeah. I think we're in a place now where we have some kind of sense of what our landscape is, and where we can support. And so I think what we have tried to do, and I say kind of we collectively when we think about TD Ready Commitment, is understanding that the pandemic has hit all of the different groups that we would have supported prior to the pandemic in different ways. And so we're seeing there are certain communities that are disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And that's where we have decided to dig in. So when we look at, you know, artists or connected communities, we also know that within that, everyone's been affected by COVID, everyone. But we know that within that, there are certain groups that have been disproportionately impacted by COVID. Right. And that might be because of systemic issues and injustices that were already in existence prior. They could be frontline workers who are more at risk. There are many that immunocompromised. There could be many different things adding to that vulnerability. And so we want to continue to support the organizations and the types of organizations that we supported before, but also understanding we want to dig in and help them recover at the same rate that the rest of us are recovering. And so we've decided to really dig into who is the most vulnerable, who's feeling this the most.
Wow.
How can we help them?
Wow.
We've all been traumatized. This is trauma.
Yeah.
You know,
we're still being traumatized.
We're still traumatized. But how do we make sure that we're not in our efforts to kind of move forward, we're not kind of leaving groups behind? And so that's been the strategy for both our philanthropy and our colleague engagement, and some of kind of our innovation funds. And I have to say, you know, it's tough work. It's tough work, not just for us, but, you know, for the organizations that we support. They've been pivoting and opening and closing and opening and closing. And like, this is a really hard place to be in. And what we want to ensure is that the vibrant arts, culture, and sector that we had going into the pandemic is still vibrant and adds to our culture after the pandemic, or whatever our new reality is going to look like. And so that's where TD is leading in.
Wow. Leading us forward. Guys, I just want to say this is not funded by TD. We're not trying to promote TD. It's just a real conversation. You know what I mean? Okay, so it's like just listening to you tell me if I understood you correctly that it sounds like COVID kind of made you and the whole team that you work with, or multiple teams, I imagine, kind of pause maybe funding on various things, reassess, and then sort of redirect funding to what might really need it. Is that sort of what I'm hearing?
Well, we didn't pause funding. There
Okay,
was
okay.
pause funding because the reality is a pause of funding might mean closing of doors. And so
Okay, okay, good. Because I thought last year that you had to think about potentially doing that, so you didn't have to do that.
we didn't have to do
Yeah,
any.
I mean,
We thought about
it's
work.
stressing me out all year.
Nope.
I swear to God. I don't know why I didn't just text you about it, but
No fun taken back.
that's
Nothing.
amazing. Congrats. That's amazing that you were able to do all of that and still keep the doors open on so many organizations. That's so important. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I mean, sorry, the one thing I should clarify is that's not to say that no funding changed at all
Of
for
course, of course, of course.
Canada,
Yeah.
but it wasn't as a result of,
Mm-hmm.
pause funding because of COVID.
Right.
That's
Good, good, good.
the,
Okay, great. That's amazing news.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so when I talk about where we're digging in deeper, it's about looking at these organizations and saying, okay, now you're in a new reality as well.
Mm-hmm.
So how can we continue to support you? Our support might pivot within an organization. We
Right.
might, we're going to align with this, or we're going to move
Got it.
toward your virtual platform or whatever it might look like.
Mm-hmm.
But we certainly knew the risks of pausing any kind of funding from our end
Yeah.
would create a significant gap for our community partners, and they really are partners. So
Such big decisions, really, that affect society. It's
yeah,
wild. It's wild to me. You
yeah.
know? Like, okay, so that, I mean, I guess I want to know, like, how, and please, anybody who has questions, like, this is live. You have Alicia before you, like, just please ask them. Now's your time. But, like, what's your favorite color? Don't ask that, though. So, I mean, I guess I just want to ask, like, how does an organization such as TD, or even just yourself, like, how do you, decide or figure out, I guess, like, who are those people and what are those organizations and what are those areas that really need it the most? I mean, we can guess, but how do you actually, like, how do you know that?
Yeah. I mean, listen, at the heart of it, it's always going to be a bit heartbreaking because you can't fund everyone, you can't engage with everyone, you can't send volunteers everywhere. There's just
Yeah.
the systemic issues are so prevalent that it hits every aspect of our society, and so that means we can only stretch like the economic power of what we do so far. However, that being said, that's part of the strategy is how do we look at getting to the core of an issue rather than kind of staying on the surface of an issue.
Yeah.
And
how do you do it? Tell us.
that is why we have such a big team, right? Like we look at like the metrics of the thing, like how are we shifting the dial on a specific issue? And this comes out of a lot of research. Like this comes out of this strategy was not just like pie in the sky. Someone said, this is a good idea. Lots of research was done to say like, why is community connection important? We know it's important intrinsically, instinctively, we know it's important, but why is it important? What does it cause when people feel disconnection to their communities, to their neighborhood? What does that cause? And we know the impacts of that kind of thing can manifest in a lot of different ways. And so the idea was choosing these different kind of drivers or areas to support connecting communities, a vibrant planet, better health, and financial security, because we identified those as like 4 really distinct areas that impact us, interconnect and impact us in a lot of different ways, right? Like if an artist isn't feeling financially secure, are they able to deliver on their craft? And then are they able to help us feel connected in communities? Like these are all interconnected, right? And so we work to evaluate applications that come in to actually look at them and say, is this addressing the outcome we want to change? Is this like, and I'll be very real with you, you know, if we want to amplify underrepresented voices in the arts sector, is this application that's coming in about tokenism? Like, have they just kind of put someone on the stage who's a person of color because they're trying to get funding? Or is this shift, like, have they shifted the ethos of their organization? Are they looking at who's behind the stage, on the stage? What stories are you telling? What language are you telling it in?
Wow.
How accessible is it for people to hear and connect with it? Like, that's the stuff we want to really get into, as opposed to, well, this has a cast with 3 black leads. That's great. Happy for that. But is this shifting the actual issue that we have of underrepresented stories? And
that is the question, the eternal question, and the eternal struggle to make sure that we address.
Yes.
And we face it in our organization. And I also started working with Luminato just after speaking with you last year on their marketing team. So it's been almost a year also with Luminato. And of course, within that organization, it's just constantly talking about it and addressing it. And that really brings me to like another big point that we wanted to talk about and continue from last year, is that we are entering Black History Month. I'm so glad you brought that up. Leah, I see your question. I'll ask it in a second. And last year we really talked about, now, if I remember correctly, always stop me and correct me if I say anything about our conversation that is wrong, but this is what I came away with, that you don't only hire Black artists during Black History Month, and I can just only, this goes with Indigenous Month and June and whatever month, you know, Women's Month, next month, whatever, you know, like, but hire and work with these people throughout the year. Because you were saying that some people only get a call, you know, during February, and then they have all this work during February, and then they don't have any work. And we've really tried to keep that in mind, and not just with, you know, Blacks, but with Indigenous, with people of color, just like across the board. So like, how do you, I mean, I don't claim that you or I have the answer, but like, how can we talk about it? Like, how do you do that? And how do you make sure that it's not tokenism, that you really are changing the ethos of your organization and your thoughts and working towards that? Like, you know, like, how do we just constantly work towards that? I know it's a big question, but
yeah. No, but these are the questions that we have to ask. And part of it is asking those questions. Like, we have to find ways to hold ourselves accountable. Every one of us, you know, I can say, you know, from when we look at partners that we work with and fund and support from an engagement perspective, we definitely look year round, not just in February when we're in terms of Black communities. But there are, I am sure, things that I am missing, ways that I could be deepening in engagement, voices that aren't at the table. And I think part of it is holding each other accountable for, you know, if we all know that we're working towards more inclusion, more equity, the answers are not going to come from one person, as you've said. And we have to be open to be challenged about the gaps that we are supporting unintentionally sometimes, you know? And so when thinking about strategies around like year-long engagement or annual engagement, or kind of not in these specific days or months, when you're putting that together, like, part of that is, in my mind, engaging those communities that you want to ensure that you aren't you know, practicing tokenism, you know, talking to communities and understanding what they're used to experiencing, what is problematic for them, can help you set yourself up in a way that you're not kind of recreating and reinforcing the systemic issues that they're already experiencing. But if you're not open to that conversation, if you're not inviting that dialogue, then you're just working on your assumptions. And your assumptions are going to be wrong. My assumptions
so
are
well said.
Right? So we have to have those conversations. And I was in our Black History Month launch yesterday in TD. It's like our internal launch. And there was this discussion about accountability that really resonated with me, which is like, we can say all of these things. Like, we can say, I think it's really important to engage, you know, artists of color year round. Mm-hmm. Who's holding you accountable to that? What happens if that doesn't happen? Like, really setting yourself up to feel like, I have someone or something to answer to,
Wow.
can actually propel you forward instead of it just being really easy to kind of go back to your status quo.
And how do you hold yourself? How do you do it?
You know,
Like, do you get fired? Like, how do you hold what is the answer?
and that's the thing, right? It's like, if your success, for example, in an institution of this size, if your goals and success are based in, yes, we want to fund this many organizations. Yes, we want to have this many colleagues volunteering. We want this many colleagues to read about this issue. But also, one of our metrics of success is to make sure that we're inclusive, and inclusion looks like this, like articulating what that looks like. Yeah. And so you're doing your reviews quarterly, annually, monthly, whenever you're doing reviews, and you're not hitting your marks, you're not successful. So I'm not saying that means someone is fired, but it's, you know, you're moving towards a specific goal. And if you're not achieving that goal, then you need to kind of revamp and pivot in order to refocus on that goal. And at some point, you know, it does become a question of, if we are doing this work in community, and if we collectively are saying we are looking to amplify these voices, and we're not achieving that, then yes, there has to be some significant changes that happen in order to fulfill what we had predetermined success was for us.
Right. So it's kind of like your internal desire to succeed that sort of helps guide you in the right direction. I'm hearing. Right?
I think, but I think external too. Like, I do think external. I think, listen, there are people who are not interested in this conversation at all. Fine. But I do think there are a vast majority of people who are well-intentioned. But intentions doesn't always create change. And so until you start verbalizing, this is what I want to achieve, how can I achieve this? Like, am I achieving this? You are someone from this community. What do you see? How do you feel when I'm doing this work? Like, wow. I think there's a certain vulnerability, and that's uncomfortable, right? Like, and let's be clear, I'm not suggesting that the work should be on the groups of those that are underserved or marginalized to justify and to, you know, help you achieve your goals. So that's not what I'm trying to say here, but I do think it has to be more than just an internal story for us in order to actually take those steps forward, as opposed to just thinking, I want to do the right thing.
Right. And you're right. I've talked to so many people. It is difficult. Like, I've talked to so many people over the past year and longer. And hi, I just want to say hi, everyone, for joining. We're talking to Alicia Rose from TD, many portfolios, but a lot about social change. And right now we're touching on Black History Month, and we've just started the month, and, you know, all of that means. And we're following up on a conversation from exactly a year ago that you can still watch. Okay, so sorry. So I just wanted to say that, you know, I've talked to so many people over the year that really want to have those conversations and those dialogues. But one of the things that I've heard people say is that, like, they're almost nervous to ask the questions because they don't want to ask them in the wrong way. They don't want to insult people. They don't want to, like, make them do the work. They don't want to, you know, and then sometimes they end up not having the conversation, you know. So how can we collectively, you know, help change that and make it sort of easier to talk about, or maybe not easier, but just do it more? I don't know. You know what I mean?
My biggest advice to people is do your own work first. You know, like, there are articles, books, podcasts, videos, like, there is unending amount of resources, particularly in our current landscape around social justice issues, inequities, system. Like, there are tons of resources. And I think where people, I can't speak for everyone, I can speak for myself, where people feel the frustration is when you're approached in a way that demonstrates that the person asking the question hasn't actually done the work, right? And so I think part of this is doing your own work, and then if you're in a space where you want to continue to think about how to implement, whether it's equitable practices in your art form, then you have the knowledge as to how do I engage people in a way that isn't like, how do I approach people? How do I engage people? How do I ask for support? How do I compensate them for their support, right? Because so often underserved communities are asked for like, how do I do this? What can I do? Okay, thanks, bye. So, how are they compensated for the support? And then you can engage with communities in a way that feels respectful, because you're coming from a place of doing your own work and coming from a place of knowledge. None of us are going to have this perfect. It's just impossible. I am consistently learning, and I have said things in meetings where someone at the end of it has said, like, when you use that language, it's actually a little bit exclusionary. And I was like, wow, didn't know. Thank you. Grateful to you. And then that gives me an opportunity to learn more about that particular issue, that language. But like, we have to be willing to do the work ourselves.
Right. So basically don't go and talk about stuff if you haven't like at least read a book, read some stuff, listen to something.
Podcast on your walk, like anything, please.
Yeah, and there's so many resources out there. We're going to share, we've shared a few in our newsletter, but we're going to share some more, in links and stuff and bio, and just send out lists of great resources out there. So basically so many people have been compiling such amazing lists. There's like so many to choose from. So it's really amazing. Like Black Film Festival's happening this month, in the middle of the month. I will post. But there's so many things. Wild Seed has a million different things going on, and resources and beautiful venues and stuff. There's so much stuff. So okay, so we'll help. We're going to try and help share some resources. But now you said something that made me want to ask you a question, and also made me feel that thing where I'm like, oh no, did I read enough? Should I ask for this? Okay, so I'm just going to be public about that. But so you said ask people like how they feel about it. So I want to ask you like how you feel about it. How do you feel, if it's okay, and if you don't want to answer, obviously don't, but how do you feel being approached about, speaking about these things, about Black History Month, about, clearly I'm not Black, I have Indigenous background, but to my knowledge, have no Black, how do you feel about this, And also like, I really do want to point out, because it's been bothering me for like the whole interview series, is that whoever starts the interview is like on top and the person that joins is on the bottom. And I feel like we should maybe consider flipping that, and it's unintentional that it's been like that, but it's been bugging me, so I just want to say it. Anyway, so how do you, if you want to answer, like how do you feel about these things and about being approached to, even within TD, like to lead that, or I don't know if you lead but to be part of the discussions and everything like that? Does it make you
It's such a good question. And I'm actually grateful that you've given me space to talk about that. I feel mixed about it. I really do. I love any opportunity to, talk about how we can create more equitable spaces, and, to examine our gaps, and to examine, how can we make any space more accessible, more pluralistic, more inclusive. I really do appreciate an opportunity to have that kind of dialogue. At the same time, I at times it feels frustrating to be asked, and this isn't necessarily in the professional space, in my workplace, but generally, to be asked to, engage in Black History Month conversations in February, and then, for the rest of the year, not necessarily being engaged. But on top of that, it's this expectation of wanting to talk about this specific topic, right?
Right.
My talents and my skill sets are much beyond my identity of being Black. And so there are times where I'm like, I would actually just love to talk about the intricacies of colleague engagement and what that looks like, or I want to talk about something completely different, but you're consistently kind of invited into these diversity and inclusion conversations, equity conversations, without the recognition of the rest of my holistic skill sets. And so that does get frustrating at times, to be kind of pigeonholed in that way. And it also creates, I think it's dangerous at times because, you know, sometimes I feel that people are asked their opinion on topics like this, particularly if they have lived experience, which is great. We want to hear people's lived experience, but not everyone has a background in this work. Not everyone.
I was just thinking that. I'm like, you have to be an expert just because of like who you are, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's conflated, right? Like if this is being presented in a way of this is this person's lived experience, I think that's great. We don't hear enough stories about people's lived experience. But that lived experience does not necessarily mean this is everyone's lived experience. It doesn't necessarily mean, you know, that their recommendations are the be all and end all of recommendations. And so sometimes I do think there's a danger of, in an effort to kind of, you know, be inclusive at this time of the month, grabbing Black people and having voices put out and not really thinking about who they are as a full person, what you're actually wanting to tell here, and like framing and giving context to their story. And I would love to see more of that. I would love to see, you know, we're having discussion about lived experiences. That's great. That's wonderful. But let's frame it as what it is.
Ole. All I can say is ole. I agree with Leah. Thanks for saying this. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. It makes me want to have a conversation with you in about 6 months about something completely unrelated, where we can just design the topics, because you're right. You have I've like read all your bios. You have so much experience in the not-for-profit sector, like just years and years. You know what? That leads me to another thing that is unrelated. So I read actually also that you were also part of like this Toronto Black, I think it was a Black Toronto community, but regardless, like this food bank initiative that you started, right? And I really wanted to ask you, like, are you still doing that? How's it going? Like, what happened with that? And also, awesome job.
Yeah. So that was with, in partnership with a guy by the name of K Specs. He runs Black Toronto Community. He's going to kill me because I'm getting the name wrong.
I think that's what it was. I know. I think that's what it was. Black Toronto Community.
Yeah, but we had connected. You know, I've known him for a while, and I'm just a great. I have a lot of admiration for the work he's done in kind of bringing collective Black community members together. And we were chatting about, this was kind of closer to the beginning of the pandemic, and noting that there were a lot of members of Black communities who, at the time when we were kind of in full restrictions, weren't able to get access to food, weren't able to, you know, they couldn't go out to the grocery store, depending on, you know, what was happening in their health and their lives. And that the food banks were being just overdrawn. Like they were really looking for support. And, you know, I made donations of food, but what they really needed was funds. They really needed dollars. And this is what I mean when I say, you know, talking to organizations, talking to people and understanding what they actually need, as opposed to assuming, oh, a food bank, I'll just send them food. But they're like, great, but we actually need dollars. We need staff to help us right now. We need, you know, places to keep stuff. We need to, how do we organize lines to keep people safe? Like there were all these different things that they were looking for. And so I connected with Specs and, you know, started this GoFundMe for Black Creek Community Farm. And it was one of those things that I don't think either one of us anticipated would really take off, particularly because everyone was in a state of, as I said, not knowing which way was up at the time. You know, so we didn't really expect people would put forward significant donations, but it was just in the spirit of let's do what we can do, what's within our power to do while we're all sitting in our homes. Because at the time, you know, we weren't really going anywhere. And it spoke to the spirit of community. We put it out there. He put it out in his group, and people were donating. And honestly, some of the messages that came through were just incredible. People donating $10 and saying, I wish I could donate more. I wish.
Wow.
I'm like, what? Anything, even sharing this,
Wow.
even if you can't donate, and sharing this is a contribution, you know?
Right.
And so I think by the end we had raised $40,000.
Wow.
Pretty sure.
That's amazing.
And Specs really took the lead in making sure that like the funds got to appropriate organizations across Toronto, and
Wow.
many of them predominantly serving Black communities. And it was really an opportunity to kind of still, you know, when I was saying in the beginning how we need that sense of community and connection.
Mm-hmm.
It was great to be able to raise these funds, and I'm grateful that we're able to do that. But honestly, it felt joyful for me because I felt a sense of connection doing this work and seeing everyone come together. Mm-hmm. And yes,
and like immediately.
And that was a time when we were all so sad. Like it was just, you know, the scariest time. And so it's truly one of those things, you know, sometimes they say philanthropy is more about yourself than it is about other people, because you can walk away feeling so good. And it was those times where I walked away from that feeling like, yeah, I'm glad about the money, but it was great to see everyone come together in the spirit of, we're not letting anyone slip through the cracks. It's not going to happen. Not on our watch, you know? So we did that, and we've ended that since. But you know, stay tuned. There might be something else that we do.
Get in touch. Follow Ali Rosa, I think, on Instagram. Ali_Rosa. Oh my God, that's really crazy. That's just who you are. Like you work from the top, from one of the biggest institutions in Canada, you know, helping to do that, and then all the way down, you know, to the grassroots initiatives. That's pretty wild, Alicia. Like, I just want to commend that for a second. You know, not take that for granted.
But it truly is
a lot of work.
But it also is who you've surrounded yourself with, right? Like I had the opportunity to talk with Specs and say, like, I want to do something, and you know, kind of we go back and forth about it and land on this. And I really think nothing is done in isolation. I think it's about, you know, good people coming together. And so grateful that I had a chance to work on that.
I think a lot of people are grateful. That's amazing. Okay, so I'm going to go back up because Leah asked a question. Leah's our co-host on Fab Club, and she's going to be hosting next week. But she's also an awesome flamenco dancer and many other things.
Ooh.
Yeah. Who you surround yourself with.
Yes.
And she wants to know, and I this question was pending in my mind too. It's just that we didn't get there, but you know, how can artists with great idea and awesome team connect to a large funder like a bank? And that also connects to what I'm thinking is like these communities that might not know that this funding exists. Like, do you have outreach? Like, how can people find out? How can they do it? You know?
Yeah.
What can we do? What can people
do?
I
can speak specifically about TD, but I think this is true of a lot of the big financial institutions. So I think that people sometimes feel like, because what we said in the beginning, it feels like a big wall, and it feels just like there's just a big bank and I don't know how to get in, that they need to find some like secret alleyway or secret back way.
Ali, that's you, the secret alleyway.
Yeah, I'm gonna work on that. That could be a podcast making.
So down.
But truly, like, we literally, everything that I've talked about as far as TD Ready commitment, our focus is, what we're trying to achieve, literally is all on our website. Like it is right there. And every application that comes in is reviewed. Like it's not like going into a black hole.
Wow.
If it comes in through our system, it will land on someone's desk, virtual desk, depending on what area we're applying for.
So go on the website and apply.
And it'll
Do you have to be incorporated though?
So you don't have to, for our general TD Ready commitment funding, you can be a charity or a nonprofit organization. You don't have to have incorporation status. For our TD Ready Challenge, which is like an innovation fund that we do annually, you do have to have, sorry.
Don't worry about it.
I'm not mixing them up. I don't want to misinform, but we have to have 2 years of audited statements.
Got it.
From an organization in order to be able to apply.
So this is like maybe also something you can't answer, but something that I think about often, because to have that like 2 years of audited statements, or to even be incorporated as a not-for-profit, and charity is even harder. Like it's hard and it can cost thousands of dollars. So like how do you balance both like wanting to reach these like underrepresented and like difficult communities, you know, not the communities aren't difficult, but communities in difficult situations, sorry. But also like, you know, maybe they couldn't access what is required, you know, and what can we do? How do we balance that, you know? Like I know Canadian Heritage recently, I think they changed it that some communities, I think Indigenous or run organizations, and I don't know if also others don't need to be incorporated. Like, is there something that TD looks at, you know, for exceptions? I'm just curious. Like, how do you balance that?
So right now, what we invite organizations or groups even to do is if you cannot meet the eligibility because of all of, you know, the obstacles and barriers that you've so eloquently mentioned, you can work with another organization. You can partner and trustee. Like we're more than happy to see one of our TD Ready Challenge winners this year, who is the Reading Partnership. They do great work out of Scarborough, I believe. Kamisha Cox, who is someone you should talk to.
Okay.
You know, is a recent Ready Challenge recipient, and they are working with another organization.
Got it.
And so, you know, we're happy to see that happen, because you're right. These are, when we talk about systemic barriers, when we talk about systemic obstacles, that's what it shows up as. Yeah. It shows up as, oh, well, you need 2 years of audited statements, which you think is kind of an innocuous statement to make. But really, that can be a huge barrier to some of these equity deserving groups and organizations. So
partnership, like you said, nothing works in isolation. So reach out and partner with other people in the community.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's a beautiful solution.
It is. And I think we as institutions, you know, not that I am an institution, but people working in institutions.
I hear you.
You know, I think when I talk about accountability as well, those are some of the challenges. Like, I think that's ways that people can challenge institutions like that, to ask questions like that, to say, you say you're about this, but here's how this is showing up. Are there ways that you can better your process? And while, you know, I don't have an answer specifically about what we're doing outside of kind of trustees and partnerships, that's something for us to take away and think about, how can we do that better? Are there ways to make that more accessible? And that's accountability that I think is key to kind of keeping us moving forward.
I mean, ultimately, I think the accountability is that society will suck if we don't do these things.
100%. And like, we've seen this through the pandemic, right? Like, everything that existed before, those cracks have just gotten even wider. Like, we've seen communities decimated by this because there are no resources in their communities in order to, you know, access healthcare or allow them to work from home, like I have had the luxury of doing for 2 years. You know, there's so many things that we have seen amplified because of the pandemic. And it's like, I agree with you. If we don't start, we have started, but if we don't continue to challenge ourselves to how do we break apart some of these obstacles and issues, we're all going to falter. This is not about there's going to be a community that falters. We're all going to falter. We're all good.
Ole. You're so flamenco at the end of the day. Flamenco is like a deep art form where they say it's a lifestyle and a way of living and thinking. Like you keep saying these statements that could be like flamenco verses. And just think about. Anyways, that's how I see the world. Thanks so much, Alicia. I want to just make sure that no one else has any other questions, or we didn't miss like any. I mean, I could talk to you for like days and hours, and I think we really should follow up in 6 months or so and talk about something that is not, I mean, unless you want to, but like, you know, without the goal or the focus or the feature being like, this is about Black History Month, you know, which it isn't necessarily, but, you know, where it's not, you know, specifically not. And we go and delve into all the other things you've done and worked in, and maybe we talk about what you said, collegial relationships. Is that what you said?
Colleague engagement. And yeah, I'm
Because
down.
that's really fascinating,
Do it.
you know, and like we can create a whole list. And anyone else that has questions, oh yeah, Ali, oh thanks, that's my fiance. Subscribe at fabcollab.ca.
Good one.
Yeah, that's right. And follow us because we have a crazy month, and it's all we're featuring 7 Black women across our programming this month, and it's not just because they're Black, it's because they're awesome at everything they do, artists and people in their communities. And that's what we do all year long is we try and feature, we don't try, we do. We featured over 100 in the past year, primarily female and people of color and BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color. You know, I was just in Texas. They never heard of that term. So we have some work to do.
BIPOC?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's very Canadian.
Yeah. It says, and I was in Spain too, and everyone's like, huh? So like, it's kind of cool that it's become so common here.
Yeah.
That we just toss it around, I guess. Although I know it's like many communities, but yeah. So we definitely have some work to do in spreading that outside of Canada. But we're doing it bit by bit, and that's what we're doing all year long, featuring women, non-binary folk, in all of our programming. So if you know somebody, and I want to get in touch with that person that you just mentioned, of course.
Kamisha.
Yeah, Kamisha Hawks, right? Is that who you said? So let's follow up. But anybody who knows anybody that thinks they should be featured in an interview or in a show or anything of the sort, you know, across all cultures and all spectrums of everything, as long as they're awesome, which I'm sure they are, just let us know, get in touch, and we'll do our best to feature them. And Alicia, did I miss anything?
No.
Do you need
Enjoyed.
Yeah?
No.
Okay. Wow. I just loved talking to you. Thank you so much for being so open and really honest and like really telling us what you think and what you're working on. And,
thanks so much. This is a great opportunity. I'm marking down February 3rd for next year.
Yeah. Everyone mark it down. We have a yearly conversation with Alicia.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank
and enjoy
you.
the rest of your day.
You too.
And we'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.